This is Story Recapped. Today, I'm gonna explain a comedy, fantasy, and horror film called The Witches of Eastwick. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. In Eastwick, Rhode Island, Alex works on a sculpture when her daughter Carol tells her that she doesn't have to join her today. Alex insists on doing so nonetheless. Meanwhile, 6 sisters approach their mother, Suki, to complain about their packed lunch. At the elementary school, Jane teaches music when the principal, Walter Neff, mentions giving her a full-time job. He asks about her divorce, which Jane confirms is being finalized. Walter then touches Jane suggestively. Jane freezes until he leaves. Later, Jane conducts the school's band while Felicia sings. After the performance, Walter thanks the performers, winking at Jane, who tries to ignore him. He begins a speech about the tragedy of broken families while Alex and Suki sit in the crowd with their children. The crowd gets bored, and a boy falls asleep and drops the cymbals loudly. Still, Walter continues and encourages them to keep their honor and faith in God. The wind picks up, and a storm begins, so the audience flees while Walter desperately continues his speech. That evening, Jane and Suki arrive at Alex's house. They complain about the rain, but they're glad it stopped Walter's speech. Suki mentions that she was so bored that she prayed that something would happen, and Alex and Jane say they did the same thing. Suki is elated, but Alex thinks it's just a coincidence. The women spend the evening drinking and complaining about the men in town. Suki shares that Walter also hit on her while his wife was close by. Alex and Suki then congratulate Jane that her divorce is final. At first, Jane is happy, but she holds back her tears as she thinks of her failed marriage. Later, Suki admits to feeling like she's cheating when considering another relationship. Alex rants that Suki was abandoned for having too many children, while Jane's husband divorced her because she can't have children. She reminds them that it's not their fault. Alex notes that her husband died, but it doesn't mean that she has to hide her desires. With that idea, they share ideas about the perfect man. They fantasize about a handsome prince on a dark horse from out of town. As they do, a mysterious black car drives into Eastwick. The following day, Suki, who's working at the local newspaper, calls Alex to tell her that someone bought the town's landmark, the Lennox Mansion. Suki thinks it's strange, especially since she can't remember the buyer's name even when the realtor told her twice already. Felicia and her husband Clyde arrive, so Suki gives Clyde the article she's working on. Suki casually mentions the news about the Lennox Mansion, and Felicia drops the vase she'd been carrying out of shock. Later, Felicia complains that the landmark shouldn't have been sold. Clyde asks why she's upset about it, and she claims to feel that something evil is happening. Meanwhile, Alex delivers her sculptures to the local shop. The owner, Mrs. Biddle, tells her that no one was interested in her sculptures until the man who bought the Lennox Mansion also bought her sculptures. Like Suki, however, Mrs. Biddle can't remember his name. That evening, Jane plays at the town's recital, but a man snores loudly at the back. The song ends and the audience applauds. The man falls back on his chair and wakes up. He starts cheering loudly, catching everyone's attention. After the event, Alex and Suki discuss the mysterious man. Suki shares that her office called him for an interview, and he specifically asked her to conduct it. The other residents also gossip about the man, whose name they can't remember. They find Jane holding a bouquet with a note signed with the letter D. They realize it's from the same man, and Suki finally remembers his name as Daryl. Suddenly, her necklace snaps, littering the floor with the beads. The others also remember his full name as Daryl Van Horn. Felicia questions the name, then trips on Suki's beads, causing her to stumble down the stairs and break her leg. The following day, Alex affectionately draws the letter D on some spilled sugar. She later rides her bike to the field overlooking the Lennox Mansion. Suddenly, Daryl appears, teasing that she's looking for him. When Alex denies it, he recognizes her as a sculptor of the dolls he bought. He compliments her work and suggests she create larger sculptures. At the mansion, Daryl treats her to a lavish outdoor lunch. Daryl notes that his butler, Fidel, is lucky with a lady since he has a significant organ. He rambles about men's obsession with sizes, then asks Alex's opinion, but she's too distracted. Daryl continues that women have the power, despite men's insistence to put themselves into things. Confused, Alex asks why he's telling her this, so Daryl points out that she's an honest and smart woman. Therefore, he wants to treat her as such. When Alex asks if he's married, Daryl says no, since marriage makes women suffer. Alex shares that her husband is dead, so Daryl quickly sympathizes, but calls her lucky because a woman blooms after ending a marriage by either divorce, death, or desertion. Afterward, Daryl gives her a tour of his house. He takes her to his bedroom and invites her for some intimacy. Alex frankly tells him that she finds him loathsome, so she thanks him for lunch and walks away. Daryl asks if that's really what she feels, making Alex stop and ask who he is. He answers that he's an average naughty devil. Unimpressed, Alex turns to leave, but Daryl asks what she has to go home to, since her daughter can take care of herself and all her chores will be undone by tomorrow. Daryl insinuates that she's just pretending to be half of what she is. He asks how much she can take in a world that doesn't reciprocate her sacrifices, then invites her to use him to make what she wants to happen. Tearfully, Alex gives in. The following day, Clyde takes care of Felicia in the hospital, but she ridicules him for running the newspaper to spread gossip while ignoring evil. She calls him spineless and immoral, then becomes hysterical. Later, the doctor explains that Felicia's broken bone released fat from the marrow into her bloodstream. The fat got into her blood vessels in the brain, thus her behavior changed. Clyde is still concerned, but the doctor assures him that it'll pass. Soon, Felicia calms down and regrets the awful thing she'd said. Just as Felicia worries that something evil is inside her, Suki arrives. Felicia becomes hysterical again. At her home, Jane practices with the cello until one of the strings breaks. Suddenly, the doorbell rings, and Jane finds Daryl at her door. Jane prepares coffee for him when he asks for 4 sugar cubes, noting that he loves sweet things. Jane gets flustered, bumping her head on the lamp and spilling some coffee. When Daryl asks if he makes her nervous, Jane quickly says yes, but tries to take it back. Daryl encourages her to be honest, but Jane just casually asks him why he's in Eastwick. Daryl answers that he wants to settle down and likes the mansion. Jane explains the history where witches were burned in the same area as the mansion. Daryl argues that the witchcraft scare was started to get the midwives out of the childbirthing business. He adds that men hate powerful women, therefore they call them witches. When Daryl plays his violin, he captivates Jane. She compliments his music and downplays her skills. Daryl argues that she has precision. However, he tells her that her bowing is a failure. He tells her not to hold back, but Jane cries that she practices until her fingers bleed. Suddenly, Daryl parts her legs, only to put her cello on her. He encourages her to play, so she does. Jane starts to play freely while Daryl plays the piano. The two play music passionately until Jane's cello strings steam up. After the performance, she throws herself at Daryl while her cello bursts into flames. One day, Suki picks up Alex for their tennis game, but finds Alex not yet ready as she's working on a large sculpture. On their way to the mansion, Alex shares her time with Daryl, exciting Suki. They find Jane in the Lennox mansion, dressed provocatively. Daryl welcomes the women and compliments Suki, claiming that she's too good for the local newspaper. He flirtatiously asks about their interview, making Alex and Jane jealous. During their tennis match, Jane becomes aggressive towards Suki and Alex. Daryl tries to calm Jane down, but Jane directs the ball against him. When Suki hits the ball, it freezes in mid-air just before it hits Jane. As the game progresses, Suki and Daryl bounce the ball back and forth until Suki yells to stop in frustration. The ball hovers in front of her and passes by her slowly. Suki then hits it lightly to go to Daryl. They pass the enchanted ball playfully until Daryl hits it upwards, making it disappear in a flash of lightning. Suddenly, it storms, and the women rush back to the mansion. Daryl and the women enjoy drinks in the indoor pool. Daryl pays close attention to Suki, so she asks if he's trying to seduce her. He admits to this, so Suki warns him that she easily gets pregnant, but it doesn't bother him. Suki is surprised, noting that her husband liked to keep things under his control. When Daryl exclaims that things can't be kept under control with women like them, Suki asserts that they're not different from other women. She adds that she doesn't mind peculiar events since the world is peculiar, and Daryl agrees. The two then share a kiss. One day, Daryl hosts a ballroom party with the women and their daughters. He dances with them, but pushes Jane too far, causing her to hang on the chandelier over the pool. Suki and Alex laugh at her predicament, but all three end up floating over the water. The magic stops when Fidel rings the dinner bell. Later, the women relax as they wonder about the future, while Daryl records them. Jane worries that life is short, while Alex fears disappearing into a pile of snakes. Suki, however, doesn't mind the short life, but she fears pain. One morning, Felicia becomes uneasy while attending mass. She suddenly warns the people about the evil in Lennox Mansion while Clyde pulls her away. Outside, Clyde begs her to stop, so she decides to take it upon herself to stop the evil. Meanwhile, Jane is at band practice when she gets tired of the terrible playing. She throws out the music sheets and tells her students to relax. The students start playing better, and she encourages them to loosen up. Soon, Jane shops at the supermarket and sees the headline in the newspaper about the Lennox Mansion controversy. She catches one woman calling her a derogatory word while the others nod in agreement, so she walks away. Suki confronts Clyde about the article, but he defends that the town is already talking about them. She insists that it's not true and figures that Felicia is the one who pushed the article. Clyde admits this, lamenting that he doesn't know what to do with her condition. That evening, Suki advises Daryl and her friends to stop seeing each other because Felicia has visions of them. Felicia claims that the devil is in Eastwick, and Jane adds that she's scared off her students' mothers, forcing them to drop out of her class. Alex agrees with Suki's advice, but Daryl insists on not letting Felicia get to them. He offers them some cherries, so each woman takes one. At her home, Felicia suddenly starts choking and spits out a cherry pit. The women continue to discuss what to do with Felicia. Jane suggests getting rid of her, but Alex notes she can say such things because she doesn't have kids. Jane asserts that they're her family, so she doesn't want to lose them. She wishes that Felicia goes away, so Daryl feeds her another cherry. Felicia spits another cherry pit at her home, convincing her that Daryl is getting to her. Clyde turns away as Felicia starts getting aggressive. Felicia realizes what Daryl is, but vomits mounds of cherry pits, worrying Clyde. She asserts that they need to warn the women because Daryl intends to have sons with them to spread his evil. Felicia retches violently again, so Clyde decides to end things. After a few swings, Clyde ends Felicia's life with a fire poker. The next day, the women discover Felicia's death. Suki insists that Clyde couldn't have done it, so she concludes that they made it happen. Alex argues that they were just talking, while Jane thinks they need to talk to Daryl. Alex gets sick of Jane relying on Daryl, and the women start arguing. Suddenly, the wind picks up, and the ground cracks, so they run away. That evening, none of the ladies arrive at the mansion. Daryl calls Alex to invite her over, but Alex suggests that they need time away from him. The next day, Suki finds Daryl standing in the rain with a fruit basket. However, she refuses to accept them or invite him inside. Next, Daryl goes to Jane's house, but she isn't there. Frustrated, he leaves a music sheet at her door, marked with a D. Days later, Jane's doctor reveals that she's pregnant. Jane happily goes to Daryl's mansion, but finds him watching the video he recorded of them repeatedly. Suddenly, Jane sees her hands wrinkle rapidly, so she hides before Daryl notices her. After confirming that the wrinkles were an illusion, she hears Alex's fear in the video, so she goes to warn her. Alex wakes up to find snakes in her bed. She screams as she rushes outside, where Jane finds her. Next, Suki suddenly feels immense pain and is thrown back violently. The next day, Jane and Alex learn that Suki is hemorrhaging, but they don't know the cause of her pain. When they check on Suki, they learn that they're all pregnant. Alex rushes to Daryl's mansion to confront him about Suki's condition, but he doesn't care because they shut him out. He claims to have given them everything, yet they abandoned him. Alex notes that they appreciate what he did for them, but he shouldn't use his power to harm others. Still, Daryl insists that he wants them back because he loves them. He then kisses Alex, and she reluctantly accepts. At the same time, Suki's pain stops. Soon, Daryl welcomes the ladies back to his home. Daryl is happy as the trio joins him in bed. The next morning, Daryl and Fidel head out to fetch the ladies some desserts. When they leave, the ladies immediately collect a book of spells, hairs from Daryl's comb, and candles which they melt. They also burn Daryl's personal belongings. Afterward, they create a wax voodoo doll in Daryl's image. They stab needles into the doll, causing Daryl pain. They then use pillow feathers to cover the doll, causing Daryl to spit out feathers. Daryl realizes what the women are doing just as they release powerful winds against him. Daryl gets swept by the wind until he reaches the church, interrupting the mass. The women then eat handfuls of cherries, making Daryl vomit. Daryl rants about the women, calling them God's mistake. Daryl adds that when they make mistakes, it's called evil, but when God makes mistakes, it's called nature. The women continue putting needles in the doll, making him collapse on the church. Finally, they're satisfied and wait to see if it worked. Daryl drives recklessly back home, leaving Fidel behind. The women hurry to clean up the mess, not knowing that the doll still affects Daryl and throws him out of the running car. He climbs back into the driver's seat, and the women hear him coming. They hide the doll in a cookie jar, then rush back to the study. Daryl arrives, growling. When he opens the door, his fingers become demonic. The women stand in fear as he staggers toward them. They rush back to the kitchen, just as Daryl releases winds that throw them off. Jane falls off the hallway, and Suki suggests she laughs. When she does, she floats in midair and lands on her feet. Daryl finds them rushing to the kitchen. Alex grabs the doll and throws it at Suki, causing Daryl to get thrown off. While they're blocking the door, Suki throws the doll to Jane, but she doesn't catch it, so it breaks in 3. There's sudden silence as the ladies regroup. However, something rumbles behind the door, and a demonic giant appears at the kitchen window, throwing them down. Fire starts in the kitchen as a demonic Daryl breaks the wall. The women throw the doll pieces into the fire, successfully defeating the demon. They find that Daryl has transformed into a small, deformed creature before vanishing. 18 months later, the women bathe their sons. They stay in the Lennox mansion with Fidel as their butler. While the women help their daughters with homework, Jane starts to ponder about Daryl again. They all admit that they miss him, but don't want him back. Later, the baby boys roll out of the nursery in their walkers. They head to the study, where Daryl appears on the TV screens. He greets his sons and asks them to kiss him. However, the mothers arrive and turn the TV off.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.